Well, hey there, folks. Welcome back. I'm Simeon Hine. I'll be speaking to you tomorrow. I'm here to introduce our illustrious guest, Freddy Silva. Back in 1996, I took a course in something called remote viewing. And in this course, we were given a target, which was a crop circle. And I felt like I had to know more about these strange and mysterious phenomena. So I went over to the UK on a crop circle tour with a guy named Ron Russell from the Denver area, who some of you might know. And Ron had a number of guests on his tour, including John Michel, Colin Andrews, and there was another guest who fascinated me with his presentation. It was about resonance and geometry and architecture and sacred places. And he really gave a framework to the whole phenomena, which I am still thinking about to this day. And that person was Freddy Silva. So I know you're going to be in for a treat with Freddy's presentation. I'm familiar with his book, Secrets in the Field, but I know he's written many other books on related topics. So without further ado, I haven't seen him for 25 years, by the way. It's our first time we've had a chance to talk. Without further ado, I give you Freddy Silva.
It was 30 years ago. I'm feeling old all of a sudden. I know I talk about age. It's not the age, it's the mileage. That's what's important. It's the mileage. And back then, I didn't have skin-colored hair, and those were the days. I'm not going to go there. Anyway, welcome. Someone was asking me about an hour ago, so what brought you here? I said, actually, Robert Schock brought me here, because I figured if he's on the bill, I want to be on the bill too. Lovely friend of mine, great researcher, taught me a lot. But the reason why I wanted to do this as well was because I like to do things which are different and a bit outside my sphere of interest or even understanding. Yeah, I get UFOs. I totally understand it. I've hung around with enough native people to understand what goes on with the management and how things work. But it's not my line of work. But I like to learn new things. And to that knowledge, I like to interact with people who might bring something into my sphere of understanding, because it's how we learn a bit more. Sitting in a box is not a good idea. You got to get outside the box sometimes. And someone, like having a conversation in the middle of the evening yesterday by the fire, just sparked off something else about a question that I had that has been sitting there going around like a strange tune. And I figured, actually, I never thought of it that way before. And bang, you're in there. So today what I wanted to do is share something that may seem totally incongruous with what we're here to do, but the idea is to put what we're doing here in context of the bigger picture of ancient civilizations. It all makes sense. So whether if you talk about aliens, the ancestors used to call them the gods or the star people. And believe me, the more you travel around the world and you meet people who've been here over 12,000 years, they've got the best stories. And I just sit down, shut up, and listen, especially to the grandmothers. The guys have the good stories, but the grandmothers have the best stories. So I'm going to try and squeeze in 2 hours into an hour and a half. So there's a lot of pictures, okay? It's the Pink Floyd method. You ever watch Pink Floyd? Yeah, you don't actually remember seeing the musicians, you remember seeing the visuals. And I asked David Gilmour once, because I used to live up the road from him, as one does. And Brian Adams. I once bought Robert Plant a pint of beer. It goes on and on. London's a very small city. And they said, why do you have these big visuals? And they said, well, we're too ugly to look at. We'd rather people watch the videos and listen to the music and get totally blissed out. And I said, good idea, it works. That's how I do it now. You won't know I'm here. You'll just look at the pictures and listen to the voice, and off we go. So here's the fun thing of what I like to do. I like to go back as early as possible to find out answers to questions that we're asking today. Because people knew back then, because they were more connected with the land and the sky. Today, we're reading books and going on YouTube and all of that. Yeah, it's fun, but it doesn't have the essence of what I'm looking for. It's been filtered through other people's opinions, and anyone can have an opinion. I want to get as close to the facts as possible. And one of the things that really startled me was that we hung around the planet for hundreds of thousands of years as cave dwellers. And then one day, around 8,500 BC, Tuesday, we suddenly discovered civilization. Literally, in Sumeria, in Egypt, all around the planet, at the same moment, in a geological blink of an eye, we suddenly decided to make fire and learn about mathematics and all that stuff. Well, it's funny because if you ask NASA engineers, they had exactly the same problem with this disturbing trend in evolving civilizations suddenly appearing completely developed, out of thin air. With technology, agriculture, science, mathematics, and astronomy suddenly manifesting in Mesopotamia, in Egypt, in Yucatan, Peru, China, and Japan about 10,000 years ago. So the question was, did we have a mass inspiration, which is possible, we are pretty clever at doing incredible things, or did we inherit this from someone else? And that's where the quest began, because in this same period, there appear all of these stories of unusual people with phenomenal skill appearing all across the planet. And these are skills far above and beyond the product of hunter-gatherers. And they always appear at specific places along the planet in groups of 7, guided by one charismatic leader. He is like the bigwig. And among these 7 people are people who totally understand the art of building with large masonry, architects, agriculture, people who know the skies like the back of their hand, and also one woman who carries the bloodline, the divine bloodline of these star people. And she's the most important one of them all. So all of these guys, but the woman has all the power because she extends that understanding from generation to generation. Now, their mandate, when you listen to what they had to say, was, we have come onto the mainland of the continents of the earth to rebuild the former civilization of the gods, which has fallen apart. So my first question was, when I heard this story from the Sumerians, as one does, go to a bar in Sumeria and you say, so what was happening 12,000 years ago? Have a beer. Who were these gods and where did they come from? So there's a lot of lands that were lost to enormous tsunamis about 11,000 years ago, and we know them by the usual names of Lemuria and Atlantis, and we've heard this a million times. But my question was, were there other islands as well where the gods once dwelled and that form part of a much, much bigger story? But the question is, how do large land masses suddenly disappear? You can't just it's a bit like being here, where there used to be an ocean here, by the way, in the Chalcolithic era. Or was it earlier than that? I don't know. A long time ago. So you're sitting here in what used to be the bed of a large inland sea. So the Rio Grande, just behind us in Alamosa, it was more like the river no muy pequeño right now. It's about that wide. It's kind of the drainage channel for this entire base. So this entire sea disappeared as well. So if that's possible, so land masses can also disappear. You don't actually have to go back in time to find out what happened to missing lands, because in 1789, there was these islands called the St. Vincent Islands, and they lay between Baja, California, and Tahiti. And there was a 12-day account that exists that describes the islands as being 20 miles wide. They provide very good harbor. They abound with coconuts and so many fur seals that the people coming off the ship had to step over the seals because the seals weren't even going to move. They were totally docile. And it gets put on naval maps and charts. Next captain shows up 30 years later. He spends 46 days surveying that entire area. He finds nothing but discolored water to a depth of 720 feet. Within 30 years, this 20-mile-long island, poof, disappears into the bottom of the sea. And then there's Davis Islands, 500 miles southwest of South America, so large that it once stretched beyond the horizon, and it was found on the naval charts in 1687. Now, 35 years later, there's a Dutch captain that decided to go looking for this enormous land that stretches above the horizon, and he was sailing on the way to Australia, which has just been found by Europeans, and he went looking for it, and it was completely gone. 20-mile island, completely vanished from the face of the earth. And you kind of feel sorry for this guy that thought he was going to find something brand new, but don't feel too bad for him, because his name was Jacob Ragoveen, and he goes on to stumble upon Easter Island by accident. So thank you for letting us know that this piece of land exists to this very day. So, but here's the point. The Earth is a very unstable, unpredictable, evolving planet. Its change is the only constant here. And the solar system is also unpredictable. You may think that the stars and the planets go around in a very orderly fashion all the time. Yeah, in a lifetime, in a couple of lifetimes, yes, but sometimes things happen. And if you look at the accounts of ancient astronomers, they were under no illusion that the orbits and velocities of the planets are absolute. They said the planets and the orbits are subject to change. And I'm going to quote, they are, and we forewarned of the chaos that such variations bring upon the Earth. One of them being the obliteration of all traces of former civilizations by meteorites and other phenomena. That's pretty scary. So if you were here last night for the lovely Skywatch party with that 50-mile-an-hour wind, stop complaining. You haven't seen anything yet. I also found this wonderful account by an old Egyptian priest, which is about 3,000 years old. And he said that his culture experienced over 36,000 years, okay? I'm going to say that again. This Egyptian priest said that his culture experienced over the course of 36,000 years, and I quote, the change in the rising and the setting of the sun and the other heavenly bodies. How in those times they used to set in the quarter where they now rise, and they used to rise where they now set. At certain points, the earth revolves in the reverse direction of all the changes which take place in the heavens. This reversal is the greatest and the most complete. Period. That's pretty scary when you've seen the Earth flip on its axis where the stars are not where they should be, and suddenly the sun rises over there and the sunset is over there. A completely different thing than what we're used to. And you probably know about this last story because this priest was talking to a Greek guy called Solon. He was a scholar, a visiting scholar, and he says, hey, that's going to make a great story when I go back to Greece. And he goes back to Greece and he tells a guy called Plato, and Plato goes, let me hardwire that story into a fictional story about a missing land called Atlantis. And that's how the story comes about. It came from the Egyptians, not the Greeks. But there was one event which seems to harmonize just about every ancient culture on this planet, including the Hopi, including people in the Pacific Ocean, and even the people of Tibet. And they said that in 10,800 BC, a fragmented meteor managed to hit the Earth, and it leads to an ice age that we call the Younger Dryas, that we probably, I think everybody's pretty much heard about the Younger Dryas by now. If not, basically it's the start of the last ice age. And the ancients, all of these people who had no contact with each other, allegedly, claimed that the event of these hitting meteorites, which we've now found many of the impact points, by the way, it reversed the Earth's rotation. So the Egyptians weren't making it up. They were there to witness the event, and they lived to tell the tale. Now, you think that's going to be pretty bad. Well, they were great sky watchers, and they actually predicted that exactly 900 years from that event, they were going to be facing another major event in 9700 BC, Wednesday. And this is the event that generated not so much a global flood, because the same water that was here at the beginning of time is still here now. What happened is that the Earth is hit by what they called earth shakers, which is the Polynesian term for comet, and burning mountains, which is also the Maya term for all of these comets coming down. And now, thanks to the work of Robert and his lovely partner, we have also the addition of plasma hitting the planet as well. So there's multiple events hitting the planet. And the problem with the meteors is that they hit the planet exactly where you don't want large rocks to land, which is the ocean. If you hit I'm going to digress a little bit. I found some research at the Los Alamos Research Laboratory, the ballistics department. This is what I mean I'm talking about ancient civilizations, and I'm going to look at the research by the Los Alamos Ballistic Department. Why? Because something led me there, that they have something of interest. And it turns out they were looking at our stuff and thinking, what if it's true that people actually were there to witness the event and people survived? What would happen if, let's say, a 1/2 mile wide meteor suddenly hits the Earth in a trench off the coast of California or off the coast of Peru, which is quite deep, and they recreated it in scale in a laboratory? And this is a peer-reviewed document. You can go and check it up yourself. And the nuts and bolts of it is that if you have a half a mile wide piece of rock at a specific angle hitting off the coast of Peru, you're going to get a plume of water 2 miles high, right? So, which leaves a bit of a hole in the ocean. So when you're actually out in the ocean, what you're getting are the ripples, these massive waves coming through the ocean. And I'll get to that in a second, because someone actually survived that event. And that water is going to come down into that hole. Now, what that does, it's going to create a second series of ripples. And you'll be on the ocean catching tuna and getting some sushi, and you go, whoa, that was a big wave. That's okay, because once that swell hits the continental shelf of Asia, it's going to recreate the original height of that plume at 2 miles higher. So when the people of Tibet are saying, at the end of the thing that caused the event of the Ice Age was when a mountain of water about 2 miles high went through the Himalaya and reached us. Why would they lie? And now we know that they're actually telling the truth. So thank you, Los Alamos Ballistics Research Department, for feeding me a piece of information that was way over there into my line of understanding. I can now help and validate what the locals were talking about 12,000 years ago. The Northwest tribes of the Pacific, to bring it closer to home, they talk about the waves crossing the Cascades, the Olympics, and the Rockies. There's one story from a local tribe whose name I can't remember, and I won't embarrass them by trying to remember. They talk about how the canoes that were out fishing in the Pacific were dragged by the tsunami, and they landed at the summit of Mount Jefferson. The summit is 10,000 feet. So again, why would they lie about these things? If you want another piece of great evidence, ever been to the Great Salt Lake? Just making sure you're still here. Hello. The Great Salt Lake. The stories of the local tribes say, well, before it became salty, we used to go there fishing for freshwater fish. So, of course, I did a bit of digging around with the local archaeologists, and I found out that the salt in the Great Salt Lake came from the ocean, and it was introduced at the very end of the Younger Dryas. So the tsunami that the locals talk about crossing the mountains eventually came into the lake to make it the Great Salt Lake. So you got two pieces of information again coinciding. The change in salinity occurred 10,000 years ago, around the time that the tsunamis overran the mountain ranges. Well, it turns out, if you go around the world collecting stories as I do, and a lot of air miles, I should say, I've found at least 180 world flood myths, and they are all identical in details. They talk about large burning rocks falling from the sky, causing these enormous tsunami. And there's one particular text that I just love in Egypt. It's my favorite building. It's called the Edfu Temple. And on the walls, it's literally like Egyptian wallpaper. Every part of the temple is covered in stories about the arrival of this incredible group of people that came out of the middle of nowhere. And it describes a pre-flood civilization whose architects had control of the forces of nature. And it's because of that understanding that they built enormous monuments like pyramids, for example, because these things came out of nowhere, literally in the blink of an eye. There's no developmental stage. It just arrives fully developed. So you have this shared story around the world where the gods suddenly appear at the end of this catastrophe at specific and strategic locations all around the world, which just happens to coincide with all of those places that I said at the beginning. We all mysteriously discovered the accoutrements of civilization exactly at the same time. And it's at that moment that the stories of the interaction with humans and the gods, or the star people, if you want to call them that, that's when that begins, right at the very end, where the gods arrive to, and I quote, rebuild the former world of the gods, because their world had now sunk. It was below the sea level. All the places where they live are on islands. Sea level rose, their islands sank, and so did their temples. So what you see today in Egypt, for example, is a recreation of what's now underwater in the Indian Ocean. Quite a concept. And their handiwork is everywhere. If you go 55 miles off the coast of Peru, in that wonderful deep trench they have there, they have now found a row of stone columns with human-made inscriptions on them. The problem is that those stones are now 6,000 feet below sea level. So there was also a landslip that occurred when there was a huge wall of water that hit the Andes. And the local people talk about it. They said, yeah, the mountains rose and fell in the blink of an eye, which drives geologists crazy because geology happens very slowly. No, sometimes geology happens very fast. I was in New Zealand when the big earthquake happened a few years ago, and in 50 seconds, 14 feet of the beach where I'd just gone swimming was now so far above the water that the mussels in the morning were wondering what the hell just happened. That was in 50 seconds, and that was a small earthquake. So think about a meteorite hitting and creating incredible distortions of the landmass. And of course, there are the examples above water. For example, there are megaliths which are completely out of proportion on tiny Pacific islands. This one's in Tonga. These things just are so beyond the scale of the local landmass. And some of these islands are only 5 miles wide, and yet they have few building materials, but they had enough to build these enormous megaliths. And that's why I sort of found the Pacific a very safe place to go look at, a place to look for lost gods and their missing lands, because they are so full of stories. The problem is you have to go there, spend some time there, and it's expensive. So this is why I travel and try to pimp myself out as much as I can. Is this going live? You better cut that out. Oh, you've got to have a good laugh. Now, very few people on the planet have heard of a group of people called the Waitaha, and they are Easter Island's indigenous population. And they have a wonderful oral tradition. And over the years, I've been looking at this oral tradition, hanging out with them, making friends, and promoting them, which is it's got me death threats from the Maori in New Zealand, because apparently no one was in New Zealand before the Maori. Well, the problem is that the Waitaha emigrated to New Zealand after they were in Easter Island after the events that I've just been talking about. And their old description talks when they were living in Easter Island, and they say when the stars shone in a different sky and a different pattern. So it was so far long ago that if you were here, waking up in the morning to see Orion here, Orion was over there somewhere. Completely different era to what we have today. And here's the thing that really got to me. They don't describe Easter Island as a island. They describe it as the lands and outer islands of Easter Island, or Waitangi Koroto, as they call it. So in other words, they lived on Easter Island when it was an archipelago, which we now know to be correct if you lower the sea level by 350 feet, which is what happened 11,000 years ago. And there was also another landmass between Easter Island and South America called Kainga Nui Nui, which means the big land to the east. All of that has now vanished. So they were there, and the only people who understand oceanography would know that. They don't know oceanography. They just know it because they lived there when the landmass was very different. And this is where the story picks up. They said that every year, the Waitaha welcomed the appearance of the double-hull canoe of the gods. Oh, my ears perked up immediately. So the gods were seafarers. Oh, yes, they were great seafarers. They didn't just have, starships and things like that, or the flying shields, or the Zuni and the Hopi call them. No, they were actually here physical people like you and I. The Sumerians called them human-like, but not quite human. What a lovely phrase. They were much taller than me as well. And they were great paddlers. They had used incredible sails, which are still used in Samoa and by the Arab peoples all along the Indian Ocean and the Pacific today, because there's something about the design of that sail that gets you to tack against the wind. That's quite something for a seafarer. And they said that every year they would come to Easter Islands and they would go there, and they were called the Star Walkers. They were long-distance voyagers and Star Walkers. So I'm getting a bit excited about this. And of course, the first image that comes into my head is of these lovely guys. And I asked a bit more about them. And they said, yeah, those Star Walkers were called the Urukeu, which means the Red Earth People. Not dissimilar to how the Hopi described them as well. And this is their description. They were very tall. They were light-skinned, not white. They were light-skinned. They were red-haired with green eyes, and they all had beards. And if you look very carefully at the moai on the left, you see the little goatee around here. Yeah, very. That's quite. Cuts a nice little chisel there, a nice little chin there. Yes, I might grow one actually. But the best part is that depicts the oldest moai, because we always wondered, what are they representing? Well, there are two types of moai. There's the one on the left, which has it's a very well-chiseled face, made of solid basalt. There are no basalt quarries on the island, by the way. But the other one, the picture in the middle, that's the one made of volcanic tuff, which doesn't look quite as good. And now they're younger. And what the grandmothers were telling me was that the oldest moai, the basalt, those are the gods. Those are the Urukeu. The ones made of volcanic tufts, those are the historic chieftains of the island that make images, like the moai, of themselves to associate themselves with the gods that by then were long gone. They're long dead by then. We're talking thousands of years later. So that's why there's two different types of moai. But the little red volcanic scoria on their heads, it's not a hat. That's to depict their hair color. They were red-haired people. And to this very day in Polynesia, women still paint their hair red to give them the impression that they were part of the divine bloodline of the gods, sometimes just by pure symbolism alone. And the men do it too. So this account is over 11,000 years old, but they mention nothing about erecting the moai. Now, if I'd carved these things, which are over 40 feet deep, by the way, I would be proud. I would be standing on the hill and go, hey, guess what I just carved? But no, they appear already in the story. So I'm thinking, so that these moai must be even older. They must precede the time before the earth was taken destroyed by all of this flooding. Well, that's where the Waitaha come in again, because they talk about how the Urukeu gods sailed regularly across the Pacific. But one year, the canoe failed to return when, and I quote, angry stars gathered close to the moon to give birth to the tides of chaos, the dreaded deluge. So someone was there on Easter Island, and they survived to write the story and communicate that to us today. So it places the account at the very close of the Younger Dryas. Well, my question to them was, where were the Urukeu going if they were coming from some big place in the east, ostensibly South America? They would stop off on Easter Island or islands. They would pick up some fresh fish and some water. They would share stories with the Urukeu, teach them about the stars and mathematics and God knows what else, and then they'd bugger off on boat down somewhere else. Well, they said they went to the birthplace of the gods, and I went, oh, yummy, yummy. I have a picture of it. I have their location. That yellow dot in the South Island, that, my friends, is the birthplace of the gods. There are 3 sites described by the Dalai Lama as the spiritual center of the universe, not the earth, the spiritual center of the universe. I've spent 6 trips down here, and I can't get enough of it. Of course, back then I had a girlfriend down there, which really helped with the expenses. But anyway, we won't go into that sort of sad story. This is where my hair fell out. Yeah, I had rock and roll hair back then, kind of like Robert Schock. It's like, right. I still did this sometimes, but sometimes it doesn't work. Anyway, I mean, are there any bald guitar heroes? I've never met one. I've given it up. My dreams are, I'll come back next lifetime and be a rock god. But anyway, what you're looking at here is literally the hot spot of the birthplace of the gods. It's called the Sacred Nest, or the Crucible of the World. And as all traditions where the gods used to live, it was an island surrounded by an enormous glacial lake. And essentially, it represented the primordial island from which everything grows. If you follow the stories and traditions of the world, all the sorts of civilizations are all built on islands or places that behave like islands, which basically represent the pregnant mound of the beginning of creation, where a creative God impregnates it with all of its information. And from there, we humans discover civilization. So it's all around the world. So it's an incredible sight. It's about a day's hike from where I've just taken a photograph to give you a sense of scale. You've got to spend a few good days down there, and you should go here. It's an incredible place. But from there, you get a view across to the second site, which is very important. This is Kuda Taufiti, which literally translates as the distant school. And it's right on the ridge. It's those limestone outcrops on the ridge. And each stone, according to the grandmothers, was said to hold the wisdom of the Urukeu, who is said to have carved into the stones the very wisdom of their knowledge into the shapes of their own particular deities. And they used a group of people, stonemasons, called the Keepers of Stone, who, and I quote, were able to reshape the stone without breaking its spirit. So they would work mindfully with little mauls, and they would go chock, 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 chock on the limestone until they came out with what is now a very highly eroded face of a guardian spirit. And you can see the nose, the mouth, and the eyes. And sometimes nature does that, and you go around the land going, oh, look, it's the head of someone, or it's a cow, or a horse, or a donkey. Yeah, that happens. But when it's actually in the mythology of the local culture, now you know that it's true. And also because when the light goes low, you can see the parts of where it was sculpted by hand. It's still there after 11,000 years. The most prominent monument is the tutelary goddess of the site, and that's Marotini. Damn, there's my ex again. I really should Photoshop that, but it does give you a sense of proportion. I'm not bitter. No, she's a lovely person. She really is. So my question was, when I sat with my back to this lioness, you can still see the eye sockets and the nose. I mean, this is limestone. It will erode over time. My question when I was looking out of the valley in my usual way is going, what am I missing here? What should I learn here that I can become a better teacher? That's how I approach the subject. I connect with the spirit of place. You know what I'm talking about. I wanted to hear what the wind is saying. I want to hear what the trees are saying. Let them communicate with me because they know better than I do. And I go there and they'll say, okay, let me show you a picture. And this sort of picture comes into my vision where there's snow everywhere. There are these mammals that no longer exist. And I'm going, wait a minute. Could this been carved before the mammals went extinct at the Ice Age? Make a little note. And then I'm told that there's a calendar stone somewhere. And I went, oh, great, calendar stone. Fantastic. If I can find the calendar stone, I can get a date. I can make it align to the stars. We got a date. The problem is there are over 30,000 limestone outcrops out in the distance that you got to look through. This is why it took me 6 visits over many, many years to go there, walking around, just looking at the land and going, hi, spirit of place, I'm looking for a calendar stone. Could you mind helping me? So I'm walking around, nothing's presenting itself, and then I found this site called Flock Hill. And I'm minding my own business. It's very quiet. There's no traffic. There's no roads. No one lives here. And it's a dead silence, kind of like here. And I'm walking around minding my business, and suddenly I come across this stone. And the only damn bird in the entire valley is standing on it. And I'm going, no, it can't be that easy, surely. No, that doesn't work that way. Or maybe it does. It's a falcon, a very rare falcon in the South Island of New Zealand, for that matter. I thought, you know what? If I was a traveling Egyptian, I would have got the joke here. Horus has now arisen to lie on this stone, which could be the calendar stone. It's telling me a sign. I figured, well, I've already seen 20,000 rocks and they haven't spoken to me. I might as well go and have a look at this one. So I went up close, and guess what? The top has been deliberately flattened with this protrusion. It looks like a kind of a sundial, and it has a nose, a mouth, and 2 eyes staring at the sky, a bit like the face on Mars, actually. And I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm just looking at things, because nature, it does something called simulacra. Maybe it's just simulacra. But the more I looked at it, I thought, I'm getting that tingly-wingly here. There's something very special here. So this is where the art of archaeoastronomy comes in. If it's true, if this is the calendar stone, I should be able, as a tall god, okay, because we're all gods, a tall god, and they were 8.5 feet tall, by the way. So if I'm 8.5 feet tall, I should be able to reference the top of that head with the shape of a bowl in the distant mountain range. It's like the stone is literally deliberately referencing this wonderful crucible in the horizon where I expect something to pop out. So, of course, I can do that. I can take the measurements, angles. Okay, I've got a lovely piece of software where you can now predict what the stars look like very accurately going back 15,000 years. The problem is, what am I looking for? Am I looking for the sun, the moon? Am I looking for the Pleiades? What is it? I don't know. I have to talk to the locals who knew about this. And their tradition says that the Urukeu and many, many other world gods are always associated with Orion, specifically the belt stars of Orion. So I'm thinking, okay, well, let's start there. So back at my little rented cottage in the valley in the middle of nowhere with my friend there, Horus. I mean, if you're going to have a god, you might as well have Horus as your friend, I put this on my computer and watched the sky going back, and would you believe that the first time you see the belt stars clearing the horizon right over that sundial is on the spring equinox of 10,800 BC. That is the date, thereabouts, of the beginning of the Ice Age, of the Younger Dryas. And I thought, wow, that's an incredible coincidence. And I thought, what would happen if I keep rolling the computer forwards to find out when the entire constellation might have appeared for the first time? We can do that. The spring equinox, exactly the spring equinox of 10,400 BC, is the first time that the full constellation appears absolutely upright from my point of view. So I'm going, I would posit this is the calendar stone that we've been looking for. And I'm thinking, where have we seen this date before? The spring equinox of 10,400 BC. If you're familiar with the work of my comrades and fellow revolutionaries, Graham Hancock, and I could go on with forever with names, the Teotihuacan pyramids, the alignment of the three pyramids, they also mirrored Orion's belt exactly on that day. And of course, the Giza pyramids as well. That's the most famous one. And there are overlapping relationships between the flood gods of Egypt, of Mexico, and also the Uru-Keu of New Zealand and Easter Island. So these things are suddenly beginning to overlap, and they have nothing to do with each other. You see what I'm saying? Things that are on different sides of the equation suddenly overlap to create a full picture. More on that later. I want to go back to the Waitaha narrative for a second. This is my extreme wide-angle lens of the Earth. I love these new cell phones. You can go straight all the way out. That was called a joke. When the Uru-Keu returned from New Zealand, they had to bypass Easter Island because of the way the current works. And they used to visit the land, the big land in the east, the place of the ancestors, where they said they were already well established. And I figured, unless there's another missing land between Easter Island and South America, it has to be South America. But where could they have had a very old civilization 12,000 years ago? And then, of course, the grandmothers step in and they said, well, you do know that when the gods used to travel back to their homeland, they used to take two birds with them, two totem birds, to keep them company and also protect them. And one of them was called Titi, and one was called Kaka. And together they formed the name of the lake, Lake Titicaca. And I'm thinking, it can't possibly be this bloody easy, can it? Yes, it can, actually. Listen to what the ancients are telling you. Their stories mean something. And this is where we find the home of the temple city of Te-Wanaku. If you want to find out about Te-Wanaku, not Tiwanaku, that's what they pronounce it today. The original is Te-Wanaku. And there's a reason why we should call things by their real names and the original names, because they mean something. If you befriend the Aymara people, which are another very ancient people, they have a language, by the way, which was didn't develop organically. It looked like it was designed by a computer, because a computer can understand the syntax of Aymara. It's not an organic language. It developed like a computer algorithm over 12,000 years ago. Where did that come from? Of course, you ask the Aymara and say, well, we used to come from an island in the middle of nowhere in the Pacific, which is now gone, and we hang around with some very tall people who we call the gods, and they help build Te-Wanaku, which means the place of my people. Okay, it's a city of the gods. And back then, when Lake Titicaca was much greater, before the earth changes took place, it was a massive island with a temple city in the middle. So it fits the concept of the primeval island of the gods and all the knowledge. So my official guide in South America when I take people there is Aymara. And you know he's not a local because he's got a beard. And men in the Andes genetically can't have a beard. So I said, you've got a beard, Edgar. I said, yeah. Well, because at one point we intermarried with the gods who had beards. Aha. And that was chapter 5 of my next book, Beards. Yeah, they came up with it. I said, no, we intermarried with the gods. Of course, we were a bit shorter and they were much taller. So there were some issues, but we smoothed them out, and suddenly, and that's why you still find people living around Lake Titicaca with a little bit of red hair still. They come from that tradition. So I said to him, Te-Wanaku. So are you telling me that the syllable aku means something in Aymara? And he says, no, we don't have that syllable. No, you don't, because that's an Egyptian syllable. And he goes, well, the Egyptians were here 12,000 years ago. It just literally comes out with this. Yeah, they were great seafarers. They traveled from here all the way back to Egypt. Of course, the land was a bit different back then. There was bigger islands between here and Egypt. But they were here. So technically, Tiwanaku literally means the city of the shining people. Okay, the shining ones. So what makes this... Oh, and by the way, the Shining Ones is also the nickname of the Egyptian gods, the followers of Horus. Okay, so suddenly the followers of Horus are also found in South America, not just in Egypt. But what makes Tiwanaku an antediluvian site? Well, first of all, if you ever go there, anybody been here? Tiwanaku and the Sun Gate, the so-called Sun Gate. If you look very, 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 very closely, and you got a nice big lens because you can't get up close to it now, you will notice that there are these carved effigies on the actual panel which depict mammals which went extinct at the very end of the Ice Age. So whoever carved this had to draw from memory when they were still alive, which means that this portal is older than 12,000 years. So that's the logic that you use. And secondly, there is this enormous quadrangle of stones, which has now been rebuilt again and again and again, and then by the Inca eventually. The Inca inherited all of this, by the way, but that didn't stop them claiming ownership. That's the funny thing. But you asked the Aymara and said, oh, no, it wasn't them. In fact, it wasn't even us that did this place. No, that was the Pukina. They're even older people. You want to meet them? Of course I do. Yeah, is the Pope Catholic? I want to hear what they have to say about it. And this enormous quadrangle, which is about the size of 4 football fields, has some of the biggest monoliths I've ever seen. Now they're only half monoliths because the authorities, after rebuilding the site, have covered the site back up with earth. So this is one of the earliest photographs that you'll have. But what Arthur Poznański, the lead archaeologist at the site back in the 20s, in the 1920s, said was that all the monoliths should be aligned by law to the horizon, because you don't just create a temple and put up pretty rocks. The rocks have to relate to the sky, the art of astronomy. You bring down the relationship of the stars to bear an influence on your temple. Otherwise, it's just a pretty building. But if you bring the energy of the stars to relate to your temple, now you've got a place where the gods really want to hang out, and it also builds up the energy of the site. That's what you're trying to do. So he looked at this particular line of megaliths that you see here at the front of the picture, and he found that the correct correlation between the megaliths and all the stars in the horizon line up in 15,000 BC. That's pretty old. That's even older than Göbekli Tepe, by the way. So whenever we have this lovely discussion about Göbekli Tepe being the oldest temple, no. Go here. There's an even older one. And there's an older one in Indonesia, but I won't go there for now. But even so, the Kalasasaya temple, which is a big enclosure, it appears to have been forced to fit an existing layout. There's something there that's even older. Because if you look at the alignment of the adjacent buildings to these, they are also found in very deep sediment. And the only way you get that much sediment is if the lake, when Lake Titicaca was closer to Tiwanaku, it began to recede, and it would flood and it would recede. And slowly the temples that were now underground were once level with the actual water. So if you get an underground temple there covered by mud, the building next to it is younger than that one. It's simple logic. And all of them, all of the newest sites at 15,000 BC are slanted to the older sites by about 3 degrees. In other words, the older sites are aligned to a different sky, a much, much older sky. So this is where mathematics comes in handy. It takes the Earth's axis 21,600 years to tilt those 3 degrees and realign those temples to their proper alignment, which places the oldest temples ostensibly in Tiwanaku at 36,000 BC. Now, the skeptic will say, and it's good to be skeptical, by the way, because a skeptic, the true definition is someone who does not draw an opinion or a conclusion. Okay? It's not that you've made up your mind. No, you're leaving things wide open. So it's good to be skeptical. Well, the thing is, if you look at the Egyptian king list on something very inconvenient called the Turin Papyrus, which no archaeologist wants to talk about, no Egyptologist wants to talk about, because if you read the actual age of all the kings and queens of Egypt, they add up to 39,000 years. That's very inconvenient. And you remember what the Egyptians were saying? They saw the stars moving in a different sky. The earth has gone backwards. We've been here for at least 36,000 years. So the temples, the oldest temples in around Tiwanaku, 36,000 years? Absolutely now. It all fits in with the actual story around the world. So here, in this very, very high altitude plain, about 13,000 feet above sea level, where it really helps to chew coca leaf all day long. So it's like your mouth is numb with cocaine, and you have to do that because what it's doing is putting oxygen back into your blood. Without that, you wake up every 15 minutes at the hotel, and your pillow looks like a murder scene. All your blood vessels are expanding, and you're drowning your own blood. Buy a bag of coca leaf when you get to Cusco and chew like a llama all day long, and you won't feel your mouth for a whole hour. But that's okay. It's helping you acclimate. That's the best advice I've ever been given, and it really works. So there's 3 periods of construction going on up here. There's a remote period, a period around 15,000 BC, which is the first of the 3 ice ages, by the way. And then there's a reconstruction after the Great Flood. So they keep going back and back and back again. So did the surviving Urukei return to Lake Titicaca to rebuild? Absolutely. Ask the locals. Because they said that when the catastrophe happens, they fled to the Andes because the island continent where they lived in the Pacific sank. And it was called Lapukije. And I asked Edgar, I said, Lapukije, is there another name by which anyone might know this? Oh, yes. Most people call it Lemuria. We don't know where, I'm just imitating him. We don't know what Lemuria came from. We call it Mu'ul. Some people call it Mu'ul, but we call it Labukije. And I said, do you realize that Mu'ul is what the Maya called one of the lands where they came from, which also sang in the Pacific? And he said, really? I love it when that happens. Because you know they're not making it up. And they claim, the Amara claim that temples that we see today are rebuilt by Virakosha, the god, and his 7 craftspeople. And they have a name for them. They call them the Hai Huaypanti. There's going to be a test on this, by the way. And if you get the right answer, you buy me a 16-year-old scotch. I don't know how that happens. And I said, does Hai Huaypanti mean something, or is it just a title? Oh, it's a title. It means something. It means shining ones. I said, well, that's the nickname of the Egyptian gods. And he goes, really? Yes, it is. That's their nickname as well. And if you look carefully at this pillar, which depicts a bearded god, on the side you'll see the symbol of a serpent. That is not because they were reptilians, okay? I'm sorry, ancient aliens people, that is not correct. That symbol is their symbol of office. The symbol of office means that they were called the people of the serpent. And why? Because once you understand the laws of nature, which are essentially magnetism and electrical current, which flow through the landscape like twin serpents, you become a person of the serpent. You can control the laws of nature, exactly as the scriptures said. So that's whenever you come across the symbol of the serpent on the side, that's who you're dealing with, the people of the serpent. So that got me excited because, I have a phobia of snakes, but I kind of like these guys. I want to see where this is going to go. What more can we find out about the Hai Huaypanti? And again, same story. Very tall, light skin, they had beards, which is rare in the Andes, and they had red hair. Sometimes they were blonde with blue eyes. They sound like Scandinavians, and it's probably the origin of the Caucasian bloodline as well. Leave that for another day. And often, apart from being 8.5 feet tall, and we still have their graves in Britain, by the way. We call them giants' graves for a reason, and I just came back from Brittany. I found a whole bunch of giants' graves out there, and the locals have some really cool stories. And yeah, they did found bones of people who were 8.5 feet tall with the elongated skull. Now, there's been a lot of stories about this, and there's a lot of controversy. And yes, it is possible to change the shape of a skull. If you do it early on in childbirth, and you get the binding going on your infant's head, you will reshape it. And I can tell you, having seen those experiments in the museum in Cusco, they look like cone heads. They look stupid. But these might be unusual, but there's an elegance about them. There's a natural rhythm about them. And here's the thing. You can change the shape of the skull, but you can't increase the cubic capacity of the skull. And these skulls have been found to have a 25% greater cranial capacity than human skulls. Oh, Now we have a problem, Houston. They're not local. They're not humans at all. And this is where the term human-like but not quite human that the Sumerians came up with to describe them now comes into place. So we were very comfortable with these people. They were very humanoid, but they were definitely not local. And the DNA that's been extracted also differs significantly from humans. And part of that DNA, we don't know where it comes from. So it's a work in progress. It could come from up there, we don't know. But some of it does track to regions. And remember, we're in the Andes now. It tracks to regions around the Black Sea, Mesopotamia, and Egypt. So what is a bunch of people with elongated skulls with DNA from Egypt doing up in the Andes, I wonder? I don't know. Let's go find out. Thank you for watching my holiday slides, by the way. Nobody leaves. It's wonderful. This is one of my favorite temples. It's the Temple of Edfu for many reasons. I tend to pick my temples depending where I am in my learning skill mode. I'm always learning. I'm not an expert on anything. I'm always learning. I hope I never become an expert, because once you do, you stop being curious. The whole point of this work is to keep curious and be passionate about what you do. So right now, Edfu is my main center of activity because the walls are covered with one of the best books you'll ever read. And you can read it, by the way. It was transcribed by an academic in Manchester in England who's passed away. Eve Raymond transcribed the entire thing for you. And it's $495 on eBay right now if you have that money to spare. And it's called The Mythical Origin of the Egyptian Temple. And believe me, after 5 readings, I am now beginning to understand what it's saying. It's a very fractured piece of story, because the Greeks, when they found the temple, it was in tatters. They had to rebuild the temple from scratch. But they found this incredible story, and they put part 1 over there, part 2 over there, part 3 behind you. So it makes no sense. So as a mythologist, I can track the story and reconnect it and see how it flows into a logical whole. So this is why I love it, particularly when they start describing the partial destruction of the homeland of the gods. And I thought, that's exactly what I'm looking for, because I'm hoping to write a book on it. And they talk about this place called Iutiti, the island of the ancestors, which seems to be a reference to our wonderful friend Lake Titicaca. Maybe. But what they're saying is that they established a presence along the Nile, which back then had access to the ocean, at the start of the Ice Age. Oh, really? Yes, why? Because the Earth has been consumed by ice in 10,800 BC. The amount of arable land has now shrunk to anything between the 2 tropics. And of course, Egypt was, by and large, the best place near the Indian Ocean for you to grow crops and have a stable environment. So, hey, let's take some boats, because we live somewhere nearby, go up this place that would be called the River Nile, and we can start to establish our presence on these sacred mounds along the Nile. That's what this book is actually telling you. And, in case anybody didn't believe that, there's an archaeological paper, which again, they don't like to talk about, because it means that you have to go and say, okay, maybe Egypt is older than 5000 BC, because they found an agricultural revolution took place along the banks of the Nile in 10,500 BC. That's a very uncomfortable date for Egyptology, but it's there. So, and they kind of allude to the fact on the walls of the temple, but they also start telling you that within about 800 years, a second disaster will be imminent, and it will sink their island home for good. So the story then picks up a while later, maybe several hundred of years after the Great Flood, and it talks about how the survivors returned to the original mounds that they built along the Nile to rebuild the former mansions of the gods. So they already started the project along the Nile, and then everything gets flattened, and they come back to start again, and they keep building and rebuilding and rebuilding. So if you go to Edfu, and you should, you'll find, if you go around the back of the site, you'll see the foundations of 4 previous temples, and there are another 12 layers under there. So this thing is not something that they say, oh, the Greeks kind of built this. No, they didn't. They actually left the instructions in the back. They said, we rebuilt it according to the instructions that were left here by the followers of Horus. Thank you. The Greeks actually told you who did the original. They just said, we just put back the blocks back together and rebuilt the whole story. It wasn't really us. It was already here. And of course, they were right. And these gods were called the Aku Shamsu Hor, the followers of Horus, the shining ones. Lovely people. And there's their photograph, right, at the back of the temple. So when you go around to Egypt, and I should say, because I know a few of you are going to go, can we come on your tour? Yes, of course you can. There's a waiting list of 12,000 people to go, and I only take about 25 people each time. I like it to be personal, but somehow the right people get chosen to go at the right moment. We have a lottery now, because I get hate mail every 6 months. I didn't make the cut. I've known you for years. I bought you fine wines. Yeah, I know, but there's so many people that want to go. So if you get a chance to come with me or go on your own, go out of the temple. You're at the back of the temple here. Go outside, take a left through the doorway, go around the perimeter of the temple. There's no tourist there. And at the back, you'll have the place to yourself. Those are the original gods, which are over 12,000 years old. That is a pretty cool way to waste your day. Again, they came in groups of 7 plus 1 charismatic leader, and then had the same nickname as Virakosha and company. They were the shining ones as well. And they're also described as light-skinned, around 8.5 feet tall, with red hair, and they also had elongated skulls. That's why many of them had this absurd crown of Egypt. It was to hide the fact that they were different from your average hunter-gatherer. They didn't want to be better than us. They wanted to be like us. They wanted to be appreciated. And he wanted to close that bridge between godlike and human-like and blend the difference between the two. That was the whole point. So my other question was, what might they have been building around the time when they were here? Well, the building texts commemorate their arrival as the first occasion, Zep Tepi. I think Robert actually might be talking about this and following on from this, which is actually coincidental and not planned. I don't know how it happens. And that day is actually commemorated and memorialized in the alignment of the Giza pyramids to the belt stars of Orion at the spring equinox of 10,400 BC. But there is one site which I believe to be even older, slightly older, not by much, by about 50 years, and it's called the Osirian. Anybody been to the Osirian? Like it? Yeah, fun place. We'll go back again. No, it's an incredible place. And unfortunately, the archaeologist that gave it that name has set the research back 80 years because we've been going, oh, the Osirian, it's the place where they buried Osiris. And that was the local story. Osiris's physical grave is somewhere along those hills. They didn't say it was here. They said somewhere along these hills. But it stuck. And we've been getting sidetracked. And it never felt right to me. And it didn't feel right to me that it looks like an underground temple. And when the late John Anthony West was looking at this, he said the same thing. He said, no, it was never an underground temple. You have to look at the actual silt along the outside of the perimeter wall, which shows 40 feet of silt built up by the Nile when the climate was much wetter, and that was between 10,000 and 7,000 BC. Oh, Houston, we have a big problem now because the locals said, the archaeologists said, this site is only 3,000 years old. Well, it can't be because the silt stopped silting in 7,000 BC. This is basic geology. So this is where the time when there was catastrophic flooding and there was this massive accumulation of debris. And suddenly, this freestanding temple on the Nile becomes buried with debris, and today it looks like an underground temple. Then in 1300 BC, Seti I builds his temple above the Osirian. And it's a beautiful temple, beautiful pillars, beautiful adornments, rooms full of incredible information about the afterlife, how to get there, how to come back, all the memories of the gods and the right people you should talk to on your journey through life. It's like a self-help center. If you don't know what you're doing in life, you go into each individual room and you go, I need to find out more about my purpose in life. And when you leave, by the time you get to dinner and a little shisha, no, not that. I'm talking about the pipe, the water pipe. Yeah. Otherwise, I've been in the jail in Egypt. You're smoking the shisha. You have got some great information about the purpose of why you're here. The problem is with Seti's temple is, excuse me, I forgot about the 5% humidity. I live at sea level in Portland, Maine, or Portal Land as we call it now. There are some portals there. But anyway, his temple follows the same axis as the underground temple. So he's figured, oh, okay. But wait a minute. Suddenly, it bends to the left. Complete violation of temple protocol. And Seti knew what he was doing. You don't divorce the head of the temple from the body of the temple. I mean, that's pure sacrilege. So why the hell did it suddenly stop and goes that way? Doesn't make any sense. Well, I believe that Seti rediscovered the by now underground temple, started building his temple above it, and the compression and the weight of his new temple cracked the already compromised transepts over the Osirian, cracks the stones, the whole thing collapses. And we know this happened because the original photographs from the archaeological digs show all the architraves, massive stones, up to 80 tons apiece, cracked down the middle, and they've all collapsed on the inside. Whoopsie! I think we better turn the temple to the left. Okay, boss. I think that's actually what happened. I think Seti wanted us to find the Osirian. He wanted to focus on that temple, but unfortunately, the law of the day meant that he couldn't do it. The foundation of his temple was already compromised. So the question now is, how old is the Osirian? Well, if Osiris is the earthly representation of Orion, that should be easy. You stand in the Osirian and you look at what used to be the front door looking across the Nile Valley and the Nile Plain, which is now covered by Seti's temple, and you sit there with your wonderful app, and you start looking at the sky, and nothing happens. Orion is over there, and it keeps going in that way. And I'm going, well, Seti would have aligned his temple to Orion, but no, he doesn't. His temple doesn't align to anything. And I'm thinking, what the hell was Seti looking at? Maybe we're looking at the wrong guy. Maybe we should be looking at something else. So I went back to the temple for the 14th time, as one does. One day they'll get someone a bit smarter to figure this out. It's like, come on, I'm going to show you where the clue is. Of course, if you're doing this kind of work, things don't come very easily, okay? You're looking for the big stuff. You're looking for the big pyramid because it's going to make you look good on Facebook. No, the most important pyramid on the Giza Plateau is the smallest pyramid. That's where the fun stuff happens, and you graduate to the big pyramid. That's how it works. And I'm thinking, I've never set foot in the last corner of the furthermost room of Seti's temple. And sure enough, right in the very corner, where by now you've got so many pictures, so many notes, you got a headache and you walk out. Well, fool me, because that's where Seti left the instruction. This bird is the kite hawk of Osiris. It represents his consort, Isis. It's her responsibility to take the soul of the hero to the region of regeneration, which is the pole star. And that pole star is represented by 7 circumpolar stars that never set, and they protect the region of regeneration on the North Pole. It's a very poetic way to describe what's happening in the sky. And I'm thinking, my God, we've been looking for the wrong guy all along. We should be looking for a girl. We should be looking for Isis, not Osiris. So let me go back downstairs, take my alignment, and put the coordinates back into the computer. And was there a kite hawk constellation back in 10, 12,000 years ago in Egypt? Yes, there was. It was called Deneb. It was called the constellation Cygnus, because the application of Cygnus as a swan is a very recent occurrence. Back then, Cygnus was a kite hawk. And I thought, oh my God, we're looking for the wrong constellation all along. And the biggest shining star is Deneb, biggest bright star. And I thought, okay, if we assume the Osirian honors the woman who resurrects the soul of Osiris, we finally get an archaeoastronomical alignment for the Osirian. So, on the winter solstice, now I'm looking at the computer right now, so what you're seeing here is what my computer's seeing, although I'm showing you the back of the temple to make it easier to see. On the winter solstice and the spring equinox of 10,500 BC, if you were standing in the Osirian, looking out of the doorway, you would have seen the Milky Way rising like a vertical river through that doorway, with the constellation of the Kite Hawk rising absolutely vertically, and at round about midnight, Deneb, the bright star, is right in the doorway. I mean, talk about theatrical device. I mean, if you'd have been sitting there, you'd gone, I won't say that out loud. Yeah, they were very good about doing a sky-ground relationship to make the point. That was what they were very good at. So now we know there's something here that's much, much older than even the pyramids. So just recap the first part of this so far, because I know there's a lot to go through here. We have the shining ones that were present before and after the flood in both Egypt and the Andes. Both groups are described as master seafarers and astronomers, and they share identical megalithic building methods. In turn, Virakosha and his Shining Ones resemble the Urukeu of New Zealand and Easter Islands, the same red-haired, light-skinned, seafaring astronomers who employed identical building methods throughout the Pacific. And as for the Urukeu, they may be the same as the followers of Horus because both their leaders were red-haired navigators and astronomers. Both held the title Net of the World for their ability to remap the rearranged lands and islands of the Pacific and the Indian Ocean after the flood. And this is their depiction on the Temple of Edfu. You see the sail? There's no sail. It's a net. That's the net of the world. Those are the followers of Horus going off into the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, charting the territory because most of the land that they knew is now 400 feet below sea level. And all three groups of gods all share another point in common, and that is that they're all connected with Orion. All of them. So likely they are the same group of people, or they belong to the same kind of academy of people that just spread all around the world. So it brings us now to the concept that perhaps, maybe, were they also present in the Atlantic Ocean? Well, let's go there. 11,000 years ago, the Azores was a formidable landmass. The picture on the right is the bathymetric image of the Azores about 15,000 BC when it resembled an incredible landmass. What you see today are basically 9 islands, mostly uninhabited. And I'm actually going to spend a week there in about 3 weeks from now, by the way. I just remembered. There's some unusual things in there. If I find anything, you'll see me here next year. I think I just set myself up for that one. Yeah, but you see, the bathymetric map bears an uncanny resemblance to the continent that was still depicted of Atlantis in earlier medieval maps. And you notice how north is actually pointing south. And you remember back in the day when the Hopi and all those people were saying, yeah, when the meteorites hit, the Earth actually went upside down. So whoever copied this from a long time ago, long after the Earth had resumed its shape and the landmass no longer existed, because they were good at doing that. Ships' captains used to copy maps and give them to different people because it was a matter of survival. The fact that the lands didn't exist didn't matter. They didn't know because they hadn't been there for tens of thousands of years. And the Hopi, the Zuni, and the Egyptians all claimed that all of this stuff was upside down at one point. So how would they be sharing the same story if they lived on different continents? And at the very beginning, I did ask, how can a land sink in the middle of in a blink of a geological eye? Well, as recent history shows, and the 2 examples I showed, yes, it can do very, very quickly. In fact, within 30 years, a 20-mile-long island would just sinks into the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But you think, well, wait a minute, Freddy, an island the size of a continent? Well, okay, let's go there. There was a Russian vessel, a research vessel, that was doing some underwater cable laying and some exploration around the Azores back in the 60s or the 70s. And they recovered rocks from a depth of 6,000 feet, which shows signs of exposure to oxygen, while sediment taken from the mid-Atlantic ridge in the Azores reveals the remains of freshwater plants and beach sand. In other words, they found the original shoreline in 15,000 BC, which slowly has been going downhill and downhill, where the sea level has been going up and up and up as well. That's the first of the 3 ice ages, okay? So now we have irrefutable evidence that this landmass and this shoreline actually existed. But where is the evidence for a pre-flood civilization? Well, I was in the middle of writing this book, and I thought, well, I'm going to go off to Portugal, do some research on the Templars to clear my head, as one does. And I was just had a little snooze, because you have to fly from Boston, and then you have to land in the Azores just to have a quick cup of coffee and a quick pastry, or 2 pastries, get back on the plane and go to Lisbon. So I don't get much sleep. I'm pretty tall. And I get there, it's like 5 in the morning. The coffee shop is just opening, and I'm banging on cafe. And the newspaper, back in the day, remember that one? Anyone before 30, you have to Google newspaper. Newspaper lands with a thud at the airport, and the front page news Silva discovers underwater pyramid. I went, what the hell was I doing when I was asleep? Why didn't you wake me up? It turns out it was another Silva, which may be related. Diocletian Silva. He's a local vet. In fact, I'm going to have coffee with him in a couple of weeks. He found an underwater pyramid, 180 feet tall, 120 feet below sea level. And there's an image of it, not the picture in the background. I'm talking about the sonar image right off the sonar on his boat. And it shows a step pyramid in the classical style that you find in the Canary Islands, in, Mallorca, Sardinia, and also in Saqqara. It's a classic, oriented to true north, like they usually are. And the Navy got the coordinates, and they went there. They said, oh, no, Silva, he's mistaken. He searched the wrong area. And I said, really? Yeah. It's amazing how this guy went fishing in the middle of the Atlantic, away from any landmass, and he had faulty sonar equipment. How the hell did he find his way home safely each time? And that was the end of the conversation. So we know there's a cover-up going on. So that's why I want to have a little bit more of a conversation with him. But undisputedly, there is something there that should not present itself by natural forces. So the question is now, where is the rest of all of that stuff going on? Because the question that I posited to Silva number 2 is that I thought for a moment you found the civilization whereby mathematics, it should be 15 miles to the east of where you found that pyramid. I think you've just stumbled upon the first thing. So here's the coordinates that we have through mathematics, because they align exactly with the mathematics of the center point, which is Giza. The other one being Angkor Wat in Cambodia, which, by the way, Angkor means Angkor. Horus lives eternally. What's Horus doing moonlighting in Cambodia, for God's sake? And the next coordinate is 15 miles east of where this guy finds the pyramid. I think he's actually touched upon something. So I'm going to leave him to get on with it. Because I was looking for the Atlantic gods. That's what the book was about. Where the gods were living, who were they, how they were connected, if they were connected at all. And the traditions talk about how at the end of the Younger Dryas, one group sailed east. They went off to settle a place called Yucatan, where I'm going to be in January, by the way, with my good friend Miguel Angel Vergara, the best Maya teacher on the planet. I actually shut up when he talks. I take notes when Miguel opens his mouth. He is the real thing. And we've shared stories and research. And he had the story of the people who appear in the Yucatan Peninsula called the people of the serpent, the Canul. I'll get to them in a second. But another group of people went off on boat as the meteorites are coming in, sea level is rising, and this landmass called Atoll, which is where we get Atlantis from, it sank, and one group ends up in a place called Portugal. Literally, I was born at the bottom of the mountain where these people are supposed to have actually arrived. I'm not saying I'm special, but it would be incredible. I was actually blonde and green-eyed. I don't look very Portuguese at all. My mother has questions to answer with Sean. Anyway, we have this tradition exactly at this famous mountain where I was born called Sintra, which talks about the off-user landing there, very tall people with strange looks about them that were incredible teachers, and they came in groups of 7 plus one charismatic leader. They built temples, and they went off into the Iberian Peninsula to hang out with us, the normal people. And the off-user literally means people of the serpent. Because on the other side of the Atlantic, those sages, they said that they migrated from stepping stone to stepping stone from the east aboard a raft of serpents. Now, I don't know about you, but if my land is sinking and there's big tidal waves and I have to get out of there to survive, even if there are snakes on board that boat, I'm not getting aboard that boat. I would rather drown, thank you very much. So I thought, no, the story doesn't add up. No, because the raft of serpents doesn't mean snakes. It means the raft is full of people of the serpent. So the people of the serpent are boarding that craft, and they're going all the way to Yucatan on top of, from stepping stone to stepping stone, because the land masses, which are the Bahamas and all those lands, are now sinking. So the sea level is going up. They look like stepping stones. And they end up at arriving there in Yucatan. They're called the Canol, which means the people of the serpent. So two different groups of gods, either side of the Atlantis, called by the same name. And their actual official name is Itz. They were into big names back then. Atl, Itz. It wasn't complicated back then. And it means sorcerer or magician. So this is the people, the gods that we're dealing with. They were sorcerers and magicians. And if you read the Chilam Balam, it's one of the most sacred books of the area, they give the arrival date of the Itz in the Yucatan at 9,600 BC. They're very specific about that date. That's within 100 years of the geological date of the end of the Younger Dryas. Well, guess what? The Egyptians, when they were talking to Solon at the Temple of Sais, they said, oh, and the event when this big continent over there sank, it was 9,600 BC. So the Egyptians have exactly the same date for the sinking as do the Proto-Maya on the other side of the world. Incredible. So this people of the serpent essentially means that Vitakosha and the Shining Ones links them also to the Maya, and it links the flood gods of Yucatan, South America, and Mesopotamia and Egypt in one fell group. So we're looking at the same group of gods. And here's what I like about the Itz. This is an actual copy of a mural that's found in one of these subterranean chambers in Tikal, which you are not allowed to look at if you're a tourist, but if you understand Spanish, which in Guatemala, their Spanish is closer to Portuguese, which I speak, and we can converse very easily. It's 16th century Spanish. And I said, it's been said that this mural was a copy and it was a fake. Well, no, it was a copy of the original, and I can show you the original. And it shows one of the Itz paddling from a sinking island. You see the volcanoes blowing up, and there's a guy there about to drown going, excuse me, are you going over to the Yucatan? I said, I'm sorry, this boat is full. That's a copy of the original that's actually in Tikal. And they said that the Itz were called the architects of the sky. They spoke a language called He Suya Thao, the language of light. And I thought, oh, God. It's like the romantic in you just goes, oh, they spoke the language of light. I want to know more about that. So I'll be spending a bit more time down there in the near future learning about the language of light. So I'll probably be here 3 years in a row. And guess what? They arrive in groups of 7, led by an 8th charismatic leader called Itzamna. And Itzamna is described as a tall, light-skinned, long-bearded man with very Caucasian features. If you're at Chichen Itza, there's a clue. There's his mural in a little temple just before you go into the bowl court, which, by the way, no one ever died a grueling death at a blood sport. It's absolute, and I will want to say that publicly, bollocks. And if you hang out with one of those lovely moments where free cocktails for me. You shouldn't have the benefits. Where was I going? Yes. If you go into the preparatory area of the ball court, you'll see his image right there. And we take turns as speakers at the ball court because there's thousands of people going, oh, this is a gruesome blood sport and they killed them. Look what they did. And then Miguel lets me do my research, which is a great honor for me, actually. I spent 5 years learning about the truth about the ball courts. I was talking about how it resembles the game of chess, and there's a mural which represents the equator of the Milky Way with all the planets going above and below the solar equator. There's your ball game of the gods. And it was all about the activation of the initiate. And I thought, oh, it's beautiful. And 8,000 people looked in my direction, and the whole place was dead quiet, and people were going to their guides, how come you didn't mention that? And all the guys are going, I'm going to kill him later, gringo bastard. I said, yeah, but you know what? It's the truth. That's what the Maya said. Not my words, it's what the Maya said. Listen to what the locals said. You can't make this stuff up, and you shouldn't. So we have the same description in Central America here of the other two people that you probably are more familiar with, Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl. Okay, you probably heard of those two. And by the way, they're not names, they're titles. There were dozens of Quetzalcoatl. So to become a Quetzalcoatl was to be a resurrected one. And this part of the initiation tradition of resurrection, which for another day. So the Itz, the magician priest, they moved across the Yucatan. They established temple cities like Chichen Itza, which are named after them. And then they continued inland, way into the mountains, as far away from the ocean as possible. And you know what? after what they went through in Atlantis, I don't blame them from going all the way into Guatemala to found Tikal and Uxmal, temple cities reflecting the architecture of the cosmos. So they didn't write very much. They encoded the information into the buildings themselves through mathematics and proportion. These are their astral academies. Each building is encoded with the knowledge of mathematics, of science, astronomy, information brought from their original homelands and built using huge monuments to ensure it would survive future cataclysms. So if you ever ask, why do they build big? Why make it so difficult for themselves? Why? Because they want you not to go through the same thing again. We will go through the same cataclysm again. There's a period around 2038, which NASA knows very well, which was predicted, ironically, by one crop circle. Thanks for reminding me, Simeon. Which I've had the date for over 25 years, and one day I went, God, they've given us the exact date of the next potential major catastrophe is coming, and I'll give you an idea. There's good news, because there's a potential we can actually avert it. It's at the very last paragraph of the book. I'm not going to ruin it for you, but there's a potential good news that we can avert it. The point is, you don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to rebuild from scratch like cavemen. If you have the information in the temples and the buildings, you can decipher the building, and then you get back to pick up from where you left off. So it's a wonderful legacy that they gave us. And like I said, they moved all the way through Guatemala. They settled on Lake Atitlan, named for their original homeland. And you think they would have learned their lesson about being near volcanoes and other catastrophes. So guess what they do? They built an island temple city in the middle of Lake Atitlan. The local volcano blows up and the whole thing sinks, and they had to move to the mainland again. You'd think that they'd learned by now. The irony is astounding. The other place of center was at Te Itza. It's the island on Lake Peten Itza, where I know some very good restaurants. And again, it was chosen to reflect their Atlantic home. And it's called the Great Island, except it's not the Great Island, because just to the northwest is a much bigger island. And I thought, that's a bit weird. Why would you call the small island the big island? That doesn't make... Oh, it's not about great size. It's about the greatness of the island. So what was here? It was the main spiritual center of the Itz, comprising 21 temples and a pyramid. That's what made it great. The Spanish show up, they destroy everything, and they built a town out of the rubble. So that's what you see today. But the strategic placement of the island down the lake gives you a lovely view of the horizon for watching something rising to connect with its pyramid. So here's how I found out. I went to the high point of the island, and there, of course, naturally, is a totally disproportionate church, a Spanish church, built over where the original pyramid used to be. Standard Catholic practice in Europe. They just moved it to Central America. The problem is, standard Catholic practice means that you have to align your sight east-west to glorify the crucifixion and the resurrection of Christ. Absolute bollocks, because once you actually have to site your building on top of an ancient site, some of which are aligned to east-west for the equinox, most often than not, they're aligned to here or there or over there. You've got to realign your building to hide the original site. So I walk in with my usual smugness and I go, Papa, would you mind showing me the crypt in the bottom of the building so I can find the original big stones where the pyramid was? And he practically grabs me by the scruff of the neck. A little Guatemalan guy says, no pyramid, ancient alien, stupid, moron, out, boom. I thought, great, you just proved exactly what I wanted to know. But there's another way of proving it, and that is I did the alignment 132 degrees east-southeast, which hides the original sight line, marks the winter solstice sunrise in 7,600 BC. So that's the progression of timeline when the Itz were moving all the way across from the actual edge of the Yucatan. And the Maya acknowledged this as well. It's not my opinion. Their tradition is the continuation of the Itz. And the clue lies in the Mayan serpent dynasty, the people of the serpent, which stretches 16,000 years. Therefore, if the Maya are only 5,000 years old, how is their dynasty starts 16,000 years? It doesn't add up. It had to begin somewhere else. And the other clue is here at Chichen Itza. If you go to the Pyramid of Kukulkan, it stands on an older layer. And by the way, the whole plaza is covered by dirt. There's a much deeper layer under there, and there's 7 more layers that go under there. And I know the lead archaeologist who works there, and he says, yeah, there's 7 more layers under the plaza. And this particular layer that we've exposed is the first. It was built by a serpent priest. And he's not a reptilian. Yeah, he's one of the people of the serpent. Is it really that old? Well, consider that the Maya, there's a submerged cave system near the Temple of Tulum in the Yucatan, where the remains of enormous sloths, proto-elephants, extinct fauna, and Maya remains and artifacts were trapped there by rising sea levels by 8,000 BC. So it proves the myths are correct, that people were already present in the Yucatan Peninsula well before the Ice Age. They witnessed the arrival of the Its from their sunken garden home, and they basically went on to tell the tale, because the same thing happens with the people of the serpent in the Pacific. In Japan, Itsunami and Itsunagi, they're the builders of civilization in Japan after the flood. Their image encompasses Indochina, where they're also known as the dragon bloodline of China. They were active in Polynesia, and particularly Fiji and India, where they're called the Naga people, which means serpent people. So every local tradition reiterates these heroes emerged from a flood. They were accompanied by 7 sages who instructed humans on civilization, building megalithic structures, and behaved like magicians. Always light-skinned, always red-haired with green-eyed, sometimes blonde with blue eyes, very tall, with very, very long beards. And where all of these elements converge is in Upper Mesopotamia, where we find another kind of missing land, more a missing hill called Göbekli Tepe. Except there's a bit of a problem. It's not called Göbekli Tepe. That's a Turkish name. The original name is because back then, Turkey and the whole of Syria and the northern border of Egypt was Armenia. You have to ask the Armenians what things are called. And they called it, that's called Portasar. And it's an artificial mountain. There's lots of temples still buried there. The average carbon-14 dating is 9,984 BC, which links the main structures before the flood. But the samples were taken from the walls, and the walls are actually obscuring the pillars, showing that the temples were being protected from damage. They were expecting the flood to happen. That's my theory, and it's a theory that's now widely shared. So I figured if that's when they were putting the walls up to protect it, it might have been built way before that. So again, if we turn to the stars and look at the earliest carbon-14 dating of the site, that's 10,200 BC, not far from when the Egyptians were over building their stuff over on the Nile. Well, now several things emerged. The view of the north of Enclosure D, when you're looking at those 2 enormous pillars and you're standing between the pillars, it shows the path of Vega, which is the pole star at the time, whose elliptical rotation is actually framed by those 2 enormous pillars. I really got to speed up. And Vega's starting position is actually marked by the famous Pillar 43, which shows those 3 vultures actually going around the circle. Well, Vega back then was called Waki. It actually means falling or swooping, and refers to the motion of Lyra as a swooping vulture. That's what those vultures mean, is the motion of the actual constellation of Lyra. But this main sight line is down to the southeast. Natural sight line is to the southeast, and it shows the belt of Orion rises briefly for the first time over the horizon in 10,400 BC, and it's marked by 3 pillars. So we now know that's an exact date, which raises an important issue, because with Giza, the same relationship occurs on the spring equinox. So one is winter solstice, one is a spring equinox. So this is where the understanding of place names comes in very handy, because Portasar means umbilical cord of Osiris. Asar is Osiris, okay? Osiris is a Greek transliteration. So it's the umbilical cord of Osiris. And I'm thinking, what? The temple? Okay. And at this very moment, this image drops into my head, showing a line connecting the corner of the small pyramid of Menkaure, attributed to Menkaure, to the Great Pyramid, extending that line, and guess what? It ends up like an umbilical cord at Portasar. So Göbekli Tepe and the Giza Plateau are linked by the same mythology in the same era. Another story that's actually developing. I'm going to hurry this up. So you recall the flood gods of Egypt and the Shining Ones and the followers of Horus, have they also been connected with Portasar? Well, it turns out that the view from Portasar is to this tower. It's an astronomical academy that was active by 8,000 BC, and it was called Haranu. It's the domain of Anu. So who is Anu? The local tradition talks about how 200 years before the flood, there's a scribe called Anu who wrote about his encounters with people of his lineage called the Lords of Anu. And you know them more affectionately as the Anu-naki, and not the frightening people that they kept being made out to be. And I'm going out on an ambassadorial link to make sure this gets retold in the proper way. They were followers of the sky god called Anu. In India, they're called the Anu-naga, the people of the serpent. And the Maya knew them too as the Kanul. Their nickname was the Red Ant people because they created order out of nature like red ants do. But the metaphor is because the three tripartite parts of the ant's body represents each of the belt stars of Orion. The Hopi knew them as the Red Ant people called the Anu-naki, which means ant father home. And their leader was a guy called Anu Sinom. So they knew the Anu-naki as well. They were the ones that helped the Hopi escape the sinking land in the middle of the Pacific called Kashkara to reach where they are now in the third mesa. You can't make this stuff up. And again, they appear in groups of 7 with one charismatic leader, just as they do in Mesopotamia, where Anu is described as unusually tall with light skin, which required the anointing of oil to give it a shining appearance, hence the nickname, the Shining Ones. But also because they were very enlightened, they were wisdom keepers. Wisdom gives you a certain demeanor, a certain glow, a certain shine. So now we know. So if we place the Anu-naki in context of the other flood gods, they are essentially Vedic as Shining Ones of the Andes, who are the Urukei of New Zealand and Easter Island, who are the Elku Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus of Egypt, etc., etc., etc. We're dealing with an international group of sages, craftspeople, masters of the natural arts, human-like but not quite human, and may explain identical megalithic building techniques from Egypt through the Central Pacific all the way to the Andes. As well as the Egyptian language, because it's all around Polynesia. If you go to Fiji, to the island called Ra-Iatea, that literally means the white-skinned people of Ra. In Fiji, oh, that's not the only one. The Solomon Islands, there's a big island called Isa Tabu. It means the restricted sacred abode of Isis. In the Solomon Islands, again, if you just follow the research, it answers itself. But back to the Lords of Anu. They oversaw 7 groups of 7 lords called the Upcolor, which means a stage or a master of the craft. And their nickname was Watchers, Messengers. And they were heavily discredited throughout the Hebrew text purely for political reasons, which I'm not going to get into. But the original text describes them as helpers of humanity, and it is acknowledged as such by indigenous cultures such as the Hopi and the Zuni. Because in this panel, in the Horseshoe Valley in Utah, this is who they are. And there's the charismatic leader with his 7 helpers. They are referred to as the Lookers or the Watchers. And they're the ones that assisted the Hopi Snake clan moving from the sinking island in the Pacific, where they first settled at Betatakin in Arizona. So if you want to go to that cliff village, it's very important. Same in Mesopotamia, they're regarded as protective people who are always protecting the corners of the temple. So if they're protecting the temple, they can't be the evil watchers that we keep hearing about all the time. And they were indistinguishable from humans insofar as they possessed the knowledge of the mechanics of nature and how to manipulate it. Thus they were compared to gods. And the Egyptians and everyone else agree with them. So where did the Anu, the people, the Anu-naki, actually live? Well, the world traditions hint at 8 secluded locations, and I've identified 7 so far. The assembly of the Lords of Anu is said to have been on a mountain in Armenia called Ardis, and its original name was Masao, which actually the name of the original Hopi flood god. And today we know that mountain by another name called Mount Ararat. Again, the importance of original names. But another home for the Anunnaki was a place called Garsag, completely unidentified, somewhere in the Persian Gulf. And then one day, by accident, I met the last surviving wisdom keeper of the Cook Islands, which you'll have to look on Google Earth because you can barely see it, tiny little place. And he says, no, they were here. The Anu-naki, we call them the Tupanaki, they were here by 3000 BC, and they've been coming here way before that because their island sank. And I said, excuse me, their island sank where? Somewhere in the Indian Ocean, and their name is all over the actual Pacific. It's actually on Easter Island. There's a platform on Easter Island called the Ahu Hananaku, the mound of the Anu-naki. It's still there to this very day, and that's what they call it. And he says, if you want to find the original island of the Anu-naki, it's called Tepetaka in our language, and it succumbed to a cataclysm a long time ago. So when the sea level rose and the land sank, their land sank, and the Arabian Peninsula came out of the ocean. That's why today it is a desert. It used to be under the ocean. So this is where they used to live. And there's one last piece of information, piece of evidence, which survives in Papyrus 1115. And it talks about a ship caught in a storm, and everybody perishes except for the narrator, of course. And he's shipwrecked on a desert island, or he thinks it's a desert island, because he eventually meets the leader of the desert island, and he gives him a bottle of wine, some water, and he says, we're going to give you a boat to get back to Egypt. Why? Because the sea level is rising, and this is the last time you're going to see this land. And you think, well, why is this important? Well, because we're all doomed to perish. We're kind of a divine people, and the whole thing is going to vanish. You'll never see us again. But just before the sailor sets off, he gives us a wonderful description of the god that protects the remaining of this island of the gods. He says, he was a serpent with deep blue eyes and a beard. And I don't know about you. I don't know many serpents that have a beard with deep blue eyes. So he's just described one of the people of the serpents, one of the gods. It's an account that provides a tantalizing glimpse into the missing land where, excuse me, these extraordinary people once built a parallel civilization before it had succumbed to catastrophe, but not before its survivors shared with human beings the accoutrements of civilization, and in doing so empowered us to continue in their footsteps to survive in the face of the catastrophe, which always comes around from time to time. And believe it or not, for the rest of this extraordinary story, I got a book and a DVD for you. Thanks a lot for coming. I'll see you tomorrow again.
Thank you.